things that we hear a lot when we talk with customer success orgs and executives in different high growth technology companies is this desire to change the nature of relationships with our customers to be more focused on the value that we're providing our customers, getting them to recognize and acknowledge that value in a very tangible way. And today we're really going to focus on some real world examples on how organizations are doing that and the kind of impact it's driving for them with their customers and the difference that it's making for them in their business. With that, we'll provide a quick view in terms of our agenda. First, we're going to provide some intros around the speakers. Then we'll have the opportunity to share a little bit around Recorded Future's customer success journey and the journey they've been on towards creating more value-based relationships with their clients. We'll then spend some time talking about business reasons why organizations are focusing on creating value-based relationships, some real best practices and how-to around making this happen, and we'll then open up for some Q&A with the group. So that's the journey we're going to go on today together. And with that, I'm going to dive in and give our speakers a chance to introduce themselves. So Jackie, do you want to dive in and go first?
Sure. So hi, I'm Jackie Cofield. I'm the Senior Manager of Intelligence Services Operations at Recorded Future. So what I manage are areas very typical in customer success operations, tools, processes, collateral, and general operational support that enables our intelligence services consultants. And I also manage our client onboarding team.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. How about you, Chris?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Holden. I sit in our Washington, D.C. office here. I oversee the various customer success functions. We have it titled Intelligence Services here, but for those on the line, it's probably most familiar as customer success. That includes the consultants or CSMs, Jackie's operations team, support, training, and education, as well as some services that we do in support of our clients. I've been with the company for 9.5 years, and hopefully I'm going to be able to describe a little bit about how we took this from the very beginning and to where we are today. So thanks for your attention and time.
Awesome. And Lauren, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, John. This is Lauren Kennedy. I am a senior manager of the mid-market, what we actually call client outcomes team here at Gainsight. So again, semantics-wise, CSMs, but I've been at Gainsight for just about 2 years. Actually, my 2 years was yesterday. And prior to that was a Gainsight customer. So I have a couple of different experiences and perspectives of being in the CS space.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren, for sharing. And my name is John Thaxton with Store Performance Group, as mentioned, and we are a consulting and training firm focused on helping our customers better engage with their customers, and are really excited to talk today about one of our favorite topics, which is value-based engagement. So, Chris, I'm going to maybe, for those who aren't as familiar with Recorded Future, maybe ask you to share a little bit on who Recorded Future is, as well as you guys' journey with customer success.
Sure. So Recorded Future is a security intelligence company. The best way I can describe it in short, hopefully for this group, is we work in the cybersecurity space, the software as a service, and we serve threat data and a set of tools and services to allow companies to better defend their organizations based on the threat intelligence that we provide them. So we have, in a quick flyby of what we offer, our platform is the clients that we have are generally accessing our platform by way of user seats, interacting with our data and our software portal. We also serve up data via an API, so we have some actual data as a we're serving clients in some combination of access to portal, using data in environments and other technologies that they own, as well as delivering on human services that we might provide. So our portfolio includes all of those things. And yeah, I think just to set the stage a little bit, about 4.5-5 years ago, we started up what is now our customer success program. And I was at the entry level of that, and what I wanted to sort of, again, set the table with in terms of this slide is to offer that we started our program at when we had roughly, I would say, 20 to 30 customers. We started to hire people into the team as CSMs that were practitioners. And we're looking at doing all of the different functions that many of you are probably familiar with, but asking the individual to be a jack of all trades. So looking to people that were familiar with security, were familiar with intelligence as a background, lots of them coming from the government or some government experience, and asking them to do a little bit of everything. And I looked back in preparing for this, and I looked back at an old sort of team meeting that we had with 4 people. The organization is now about 85 today. So I looked back at an old slide when we had a team, all hands meeting with 4 people, and the top bullet on there was the intent of the team was to enable clients to derive value from our products. So in terms of like value as an outcome, it's always been part of our mission as a team. But what I really wanted to illustrate with and to communicate to start here is that we've been doing this for a number of years, and it was for a long time. As we had jack of all trades trying to do various things in customer success. It was a slog, and it was largely customer success's responsibility to make sure that value was derived. And I think it still is. We're the tip of the spear. We motivate that. It's the reason we exist in the organization. But roughly a year and a half ago, myself and a couple of others in the organization went and rallied the company leadership around that mission. And we said, look, customer success is at the fore of this, but we also need marketing. We also need product. We need sales. We need all the different functions of the business to be as focused on enabling outcomes for the products that we serve and services that we deliver to our clients as we are in terms of the thinking. And so what I hope you take away from this is that at some point, as your organizations mature and your customer success teams mature, it is of use and it is valuable to deliver that message and rally the whole organization and the different aspects of the business around that message that experience is good, positive customer experience is good. Having people use the product is certainly an ideal outcome. But if the entire organization isn't focused around clients deriving some sort of outcome that's meaningful to their business, then it's going to be an uphill battle. And we've seen a lot of success come out of customer success liaising with other parts of the organization and motivating a lot of the different pieces of the business to stay focused on developing product that explicitly delivers measurable outcomes, on marketing, focusing their messaging around deriving sort of valuable outcomes from the product and services that we provide. And this illustrates that it took a couple of years to get there. But I just at the start here, I encourage any of you that feel like you are the only ones thinking about that message of delivering value to clients, to see if you can put your foot down and put a stake in the ground and say, we need the business to rally around this, and we'll lead the way and support everyone else in the organization, but it has to be a company-wide focus.
I think that's a really interesting point, and something that I think a lot of organizations probably realize, but miss the opportunity to get the full buy-in of that cross-functional team.
Yeah, and along the way, you'll see I have an org chart later in the presentation. But along the way, that hiring of jack of all trades at the beginning has evolved, and a lot of the people that were in at the ground level, including Jackie, who was one of the first 4 people that we hired into this team as a CSM. Those people have now taken on professional development and grown into roles that they lead a function in the business that now enables all the CSMs that are in the field to do their job in a more efficient and effective way. So a lot of those people that we asked to do a little bit of everything have found a focus area and have built teams that are very successful in their own right, and now enable the whole business to run in a really nice way.
And Chris, one of the things that I think is interesting that you spoke about is how you really rallied the organization around this focus on value. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing just with the group how you really got that buy-in and kind of why you guys as an organization decided to make this shift and really focus on value-based relationship with your clients.
Yeah, sure. Well, so there are a couple of reasons. One, it's an awful lot easier to justify renewal and growth in terms of just pure dollars when you can point to or better yet, agree upon with your clients that they've achieved some outcomes that are of a discrete value. Sometimes it's hard to for clients to even put a dollar amount on it. In our business, in cybersecurity, its nature is largely that it's a defensive business, and if nothing happens, that's good. Some of you may be in organizations, say, where your business is marketing, and the outcomes can be nicely tied to an uptick in business or leads converted to sales and things like that. It is, measurable value is sometimes a little bit tricky in our business. So what we focused on is a combination of identifying and capturing anecdotal outcomes that were successful and meaningful to our client's business, as well as encouraging them to think about measuring outcomes in an actual sort of tangible way, whether it was reduced time, so efficiency gains for the organization so that they could go back up to their CIO and say, look, we're actually saving money for the business because our analysts and our security operators are spending less time on routines that took us a huge amount of man hours. So the selfish answer is that we moved to this because we found that we would come up on renewals, and users would be happy. They would love working with us. They would love working with our people. They're interested and curious about the technology, but they couldn't put their finger on or communicate how there was value actually being delivered to the business by using our product, even though there might have been a sense that there was. And so really making sure that we focused on capturing those, on collaborating with clients on why it was valuable, on instances where there proved to be sort of tangible value to the business. And in our case, largely thinking about how our technology reduces risk for the organization since we're in security. So that's why we moved why we moved that direction, out of just emerging from sort of just looking at product usage and satisfaction with the experience and engagement with our company.
I think that's a really interesting point. And one of the other things that you shared as we were preparing for this, and I think this is true for all of us, is the hot marketplace in terms of number of different alternative options that your customers have to invest in relative to security solutions. I think one of the other pieces, whether or not we sell products that support a defensive, action as you described, or something that's more easily quantifiable. Something I think we can all relate to is that there are new competitors emerging in each of our spaces every day. And I think the other thing that was really interesting as we talked about preparing for this was how you guys use this, not just thinking about it in terms of helping your clients, but also as a way to help differentiate yourself from the crowded marketplace of vendors calling on your customers.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting space in that the threat intelligence aspect of security is fairly small in terms of dollars being spent in cybersecurity, and we have few sort of head-on direct competitors. But where we do have an awful lot of competition is the opportunity to spend money in cybersecurity for teams. So our competition for spend is intense. Even if we're not sort of waging war with 3 or 4 direct competitors all the time. And the other thing that becomes interesting is as a competitive function in our market is that it's extremely transient right now, both at the leadership and the operator level. So in focusing every ounce of energy on how does the business and how is your organization deriving value from our product, it takes a little bit of risk away from the human relationships that we develop and repositions those to being a relationship with the business. So when that leader goes, or when that stakeholder goes to the next organization, they don't take your business away, because the only thing you had was the sort of proof of value and the trust that you had with that individual. And instead, that trust and that value is described, and it's with the organization rather than the individual.
That's interesting, and I think that's another great point that we're probably all facing is how do you deal with the nature of transitioning relationships and transitioning roles? Because I think at least in our business, I would assume in others as well, the amount of turnover that happens within your buyers is pretty unbelievable. So Chris, I appreciate you sharing and teeing up a little bit around why you guys decided to make this move, and I'll open it up to you and Jackie, because I know you both really worked closely on this. Can you talk a little about how you guys have implemented this and what you've put in place from an organizational perspective to create a different kind of relationship with your clients?
Sure. So, I'll get into this. So we, in designing this, we wanted to call out 3 core, ways that we approach this and think about establishing these value-based relationships and the key phases. So it really comes down to when we define the value, then we prove it, and then we're identifying and growing it. And it's an iterative process, as I'll talk through in a minute, but it starts in pre-sales. It starts during when our pre-sales team is engaging with the client and identifying and defining what they want to see value from the purchase of Recorded Future. And, and this iterative process hopefully continues into the many years that they are a Recorded Future client. But as I said, first we're defining the value with the customer. So from our team is taking from that pre-sales engagement, we're understanding what did they say was their value objectives for purchasing Recorded Future. Usually this is the purchasing reason, the purchasing justification for why they're bringing our technology into their organization. And and so that's passed on to our team, and we have an internal handoff process where we seek to understand and dig into that. Sometimes this needs to be defined a little bit more, so the client onboarding team then will come in during the prove the value stage at the onset and do a little bit of discovery with clients if we feel that we need to put a little more definition around the information that was shared with us. And I'll just speak a little bit in detail on the prove the value phase, since I do manage the client onboarding team, since it's important to set the mark for and delivering that to the customer. So you'll see here we have a goal of 4 weeks to complete our onboarding, and the goal really is ROI in 30 days. And so how are we doing this specifically? Well, there's a few ways, but I want to call attention just to a couple. The first thing that we do is first, as I mentioned, we're extracting from the customer what they care about. Like, what's your value objective? What do you want to see value on really quickly? And once we get this information, we're rallying around it internally. And that's for the team that's working with the customer during the onboarding period, which is the onboarding manager, and then their consultant, and usually the account manager. And so we're rallying around this internally for the purpose of making sure that we focus the scope only on what matters to achieving those objectives, and everything else that doesn't serve that is removed. So every task that the team creates is serving those objectives. And we iterate this constantly with the client, making sure that this is still relevant, they're still on board with this, to make sure that we're all moving in tandem essentially to the same goals. And we measure achievement of goals, and specifically client outcomes tying to their objectives. We use Gainsight for that. I'll talk about that a little more in depth later on. But tactically, we're using a mixture of the activity timeline to log those the customers' achievement of meaningful outcomes. So after we've proved the value in around 4 weeks, and I can proudly say that we launched our client onboarding program roughly a year and a half ago, and we're pretty much on target, which I'm really, really pleased about. So we can, safely say today that this is actually true, and a lot of our clients are seeing success that quickly. And then, past that phase where, as it says, we're continuously identifying and growing value for our clients. We have a more kind of strategic customer engagement that we deploy in order to do this, which is called our quarterly intelligence reviews, which is essentially akin to a quarterly business review. But we call it a quarterly intelligence review because we're making it specific to our clients' needs, and we're in the intelligence business, so we're covering a lot of information pertinent to threat intelligence, of course. So during these meetings, we're checking in on objectives, our current plan for achieving those, and we're looking to identify new ways that the customer can get value from our product and our services. And but our team really is constantly focused on extracting this information from clients. We deploy monthly check-ins for clients, and really any client engagement, you can see the right questions to learn this information that you can then put to work to achieve, again, more value for the customer.
That's really interesting. And I think a couple of things that I think are really interesting about this that you discussed. One is on the onboarding side. I think it sounds really straightforward, but it's actually pretty transformative, at least from what you described, what we see with other clients. Changing the nature of onboarding from just being about getting them up and using to really, from the very onset, creating a defined set of outcomes that we're working towards and aligning that onboarding experience with being able to demonstrate fast progress. I think that's a really, really interesting approach, and one that changes the nature of the engagement with the client almost immediately. So I think that's a really, really interesting point for all of us. And then I think the other piece, which is interesting, is part of the way you've architected the transition between onboarding to continue that focus on value and outcome and connected that together in a way that the total engagement with the customer really all feeds that core purpose of creating value together. And I think it's pretty unique the way that you've threaded it together from the pre-sales process through the actual renewal. I think it's a really exciting and unique approach.
Just to chime in real quick on, I think in terms of how we've evolved as an organization, I think that Jackie's highlighting here of defining value. That is linked to actually defining what the goals and the objectives are. And for quite a while, we were more than willing to provide all sorts of ways that you could use our product and services to do many things that were exciting and interesting. But coming to agreement with your clients in terms of what they're actually trying to do, like in incorporating pre-sales into this process, they spent money with you in the first place for some reason. And making sure that you agree upon and even write down and revisit the objectives and the reasons and the rationale for spending that money makes things a lot easier to justify down the road, and understand if things in an organization with a client have changed and how you need to adjust as a customer success team and what you might be delivering, or if there are opportunities for expansion, or if there's risk to the business, to your business, because something has changed at a company in terms of the objectives and motivations that they have. And I think that was a real shift for us in terms of being willing and brave enough and collaborative enough to go and say, let's establish together what the goals are for this thing is, and then make sure that we go and do it. And Jackie's group and the operations side has been really driving that from the onboarding through the transition into the customer success team. It's been pretty important for us as a shift in the mindset and the business for the customer success team.
That's really interesting. And Chris, a question for you when you think about that mindset shift, because you mentioned there's some bravery involved and you have to really get the organization behind that. How did you get the buy-in for people to really make that kind of a leap, and what were some of the outcomes internally that you focused on as you made that jump?
The motivation was that we saw enough, like I said before, we saw enough of these clients that seemed to be really excited and pleased about the relationship, but couldn't figure out a way to justify staying as clients of ours. Internally, arming people, Jackie's team has been a big part of this in developing content that enables the CSMs to go out and ask the right questions, to do discovery in the right way, and just like the prep that goes into walking into a room and having the questions to frame a conversation in the right way, so that you're actually orienting the whole client experience around asking and establishing the objectives rather than showcasing all of the fantastic things that your product does. I think a lot of times, at least for my experience with technical teams that do this kind of work, there's an innate sort of desire to show how amazing the product is rather than focus on why the customer wants your product to be amazing, right? And so I think making sure that you flip that around and it's really focused on why the client and why the end users want this to be effective is the big shift, right? It's not about you telling him how amazing this product and this tech and this software that you have is. It's about understanding why they want it to do things.
I'll also add from the Gainsight perspective a couple different points similar to what Chris has been mentioning, but definitely as cliche as it sounds, the early and often approach with customers as far as setting the expectation during the sales cycle and during implementation of just kind of point blank saying, let's talk about your desired outcomes. And by the way, I'm going to be asking you this, or somebody on my team is going to be asking you this on a regular basis throughout our partnership, so that those conversations don't come as a surprise. You can think of it almost as change management with the customer in some ways. So really just being clear and stating that, hey, we will talk about this throughout your partnership. Let's always be prepared for these conversations. So that's one aspect as far as how to really tactically do it with the customer. But I think from the motivation perspective as well, and happy to touch on this with this slide as well, but enabling the team, absolutely. And I think, frankly, compensating the team around these ROI conversations as well, or outcomes conversations. So internally here, we do 50% of the CSM's variable compensation is tied to them identifying what we call verified outcomes, or these outcomes points with the customer. So an additional method of motivation there.
That's a great point and a great lead in to the next piece here, which is really around how, as you make this shift, the role of the CSM really begins to change. And Chris and Jackie, this is obviously the place where we really intersected and worked closely with you all. Lauren, maybe you can share just some of your perspective on how the role of the CSM changes, from a Gainsight being really the leader in customer success, how that role changes, and then we can get some perspective from Jackie and Chris as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot that goes into thinking about the role of a CSM. When you think at kind of the base level of a CSM role, there's two things they're most likely going to be doing. One is potentially filling in for the product. So if you have a highly complex product or just an immature product that's being developed, your CSMs most likely will fill in some sort of product gap there. So that's one skill set to potentially be looking for. But the next, and that ties in a lot to the development here, is based on the industry that you're in. So if you're in a really immature industry, so your CSM is going to have to also evangelize and really be very hands-on and a consultant for the customer. So I think those are dependent upon where your company is, that's kind of the base of what you want to look for in a role. Then the hope is, right, your product, whether it's just new and is building up, or based on customer feedback, you're able to simplify it, the role becomes by nature less technical and much more the role of a consultant. And so starting to hire for people that have that skill set of communication, I think Chris mentioned this, but kind of that be brave mentality, and not scared of some of the tough strategic conversations becomes increasingly important as you look for CSMs.
That's a great point. And Jackie and Chris, from a recorded feature perspective, one of the things I think is really interesting is that you all really made this shift, keeping a lot of the same people in place that you started with. And so one of the things you really focused on was how did you enable your people with new and different skills? So how did you guys tackle that approach around kind of migrating a group that started out maybe more towards the left and moving them more towards the right over time?
I'll start, and then I might hand it over to Jackie, since she actually is one of the people that's done this here. As we had, let's say, a handful of people that were trying to do bits and pieces of everything, from onboarding to training to ongoing consulting to support to who knows what else, liaising with product, all the things that you do. We found sort of a organizational inefficiency, right? And over time, we kind of tried to pick spots that were causing the most friction or the most sort of work across the group, where we could find areas to specialize in a function in the team. Jackie was the first in the team to take on sort of a unique functional role in operations, but we've also established things that cut across the team, that we felt like a group could enable everyone through onboarding, through development of content for quarterly intelligence reviews, and sort of analytics around our client usage. The Gainsight piece obviously is big in terms of covering the entire client base, training and education, doing tier 1 product support out of an independent group rather than asking the CSMs to do it. And all those roles have come about over time, and we've sort of pulled pieces away from the world of things that individual CSMs do, which is a little painful at times because people feel like they're taking your job away. But pulling pieces out that look like they could be there could be a lot more efficiency, and seeing if there were people with skill sets in the group that would be really effective there and provide for some professional growth. And someone internally like that already knows our product and our customers so well that it's wonderful internal knowledge. It's wonderful sort of market knowledge to have in building out a new function in the team. So I don't know, Jackie, if you want to talk about it at all from your perspective.
Sure. No, I think a couple of things that really enabled us to make this transition so well was that, I mean, kind of like by nature of, right, as you were saying, we hired jack of all trade kind of people. And so naturally, those people are likely like really skilled or just really passionate about a couple of the skills that they have. And I think that's what happened absolutely on our team. And in combination with the fact that we work for a company that really just empowers people to identify issues and challenges and jump on it and own it, and gives individuals that level of autonomy, just the two of those together, I think allowed us to naturally grow these initiatives. And another big part of it too is that there was a business need, right? So we were, for my team, for developing the customer success operations team, we were getting to a size and reaching global scope where it was time that we needed to automate some of what we were doing and scale what we were doing. So I think the combination of those factors really enabled us to make this transition.
I think that's a great point. And the other piece that I would say, just from an outsider's perspective, having gotten to know you all, that's a little bit unique about the way you tackled it is I think you thought both about the human element and how do you enable the people on your teams with the right skills. Like part of some of what we worked on around enabling them to have effective discovery conversations throughout that life cycle, but also augmenting that with technology, because part of what we see is frequently people focus on either the skills or the technology, but don't necessarily blend them together to drive an optimal outcome. So I think one of the things that's pretty unique about the way you guys manage this was you thought both about enabling the right skills to change the dynamic and then how to augment that with technology in a way that I think most people don't always think through how that fits together in as much depth as you all did as you made this jump. So Chris, with that, we talked a little bit about some of the specialization that you all went through, and maybe you can share with the group. You shared a little bit about why you did this, but maybe share a little bit around how you did this and how it's enabled you guys to better drive a value-based relationship with your clients.
Yeah, that's perfect. I want to be mindful of the time too, because I know there's some other good content to get here towards the end of the presentation. So I'll keep this tight. I'll tell you this is what our org looks like from a structure perspective today. Basically, all of the things on the left, support, ops, training, partners, services, all of those things in some way support the larger consulting group. So I won't go into detail about all of those, but I think that in linking this back to the value-based outcomes, breaking out some of these functions that we know sort of cut across the whole intelligence services or customer success organization, and peeling off some of those responsibilities from the consultants or consultants. You think of that synonymous with a customer success manager for us. That has allowed them to be much more collaborative, to spend their time on actually working and doing discovery with clients, on making sure that outcomes are understood and established and agreed upon, because they're not jumping to a support ticket. They're not going and trying to onboard the most recent 2 clients and sort of breaking away and taking attention from someone that's in the month sort of 4 through 8 of a contract, which is sometimes where things can go on autopilot a little bit. So the real value in getting to this point, which I know is a luxury because we've grown enough and we've been afforded the resources to do this. The real benefit for us has been it's allowed the consultants and the customer success managers the resource in terms of time and brain space to focus on generating outcomes for their clients, rather than jumping from one thing to the next or doing the next long hour training on our product and then they get on a plane to go do something else. Like, it's really allowed those groups to focus on their segments of the business and develop solutions and offer ways to establish value for each and every client, rather than being so scatterbrained. So in short, that's been the best outcome, I think.
Awesome. And then with that, we're going to shift a little bit and focus on, I think it's been a great setup in terms of some of the ways that you guys have enabled this from an organization perspective, some of the different skills and pieces you've had to put in place. We want to shift a little bit and talk about how you actually measure some of those outcomes and how you leverage technology to help drive that value-based outcome with clients. And so I'll maybe start with you, Lauren, just from a Gainsight perspective. One of the things that Chris mentioned earlier was this shift of going from experience to outcomes. So can you talk a little bit about, from a Gainsight perspective, how you see customers tackling that shift from just measuring on experience to really also measuring on outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that, no surprise, is a very hot topic. So yeah, it starts with the experience, and that's a good number of data points, but also includes a bit of the CSM sentiment. When we look at outcomes, it's really an exercise of thinking through a framework that we've developed here called the DEAR framework. So it's looking at deployment, regardless if your licenses or a different type of kind of deployment model. There's something that your customers need to do initially to leverage your product. So you start with looking at deployment, you then look at the E, which is engagement, and that's really making sure you're engaging with the right stakeholders at the customer company. And obviously can get a lot of good insight around outcomes there. And then we look at adoption. And I think the key here is that while these are all data points, so fully automated, not requiring your CSM to take effort, it's the idea that looking at adoption is still key, but then translating it into what are the behaviors the customer and the customer's end users are actually taking with your platform. Going into a meeting with an executive, they don't care that much if their team is using a specific feature. What they care about is what are the behaviors their team is doing with that feature? How is it driving a change in something like efficiency or a specific ROI point for them? So it's translating a data point of adoption to behaviors. And then the final part of outcomes is just point blank tracking those ROI conversations. So at Gainsight, no surprise, we use our product and use the success plans feature to actually track. And again, it's that early and often. So saying to the customer, what's the metric you're looking to achieve? What's the benchmark of where you are now? What's your future goal? And when should we revisit it to see if you accomplish that goal? And so tracking not only things that have already been achieved, but the future, essentially forecasting for ROI as well. So those are the main parts, again, the deployment, engagement, adoption, and then ROI that roll up into outcomes. And it's a perfect segue into the slide. Which is
I was gonna say, I think it's a perfect segue into talking about some of the specific things that you measure.
Yeah. So these are, you can think of phase 1, 2, and 3 as the maturity of a post-sales organization. And this is looking at specifically the metrics that you can track as a CSM organization. You'll probably start really with just activities. And a part of this is because you're most likely still figuring out what activities actually drive value for the customer. But it's important to track those nonetheless. So it's things like those executive engagements and end user engagements. You can then get into leading indicators. So now you have a large enough book of business and a bit of trending history to look at how has adoption of your product increased over time or changed over time. Again, those health score changes. And then finally getting into phase 3, this is where you're looking at those lagging outcomes. So looking at, assuming you're achieving those customer experience benchmarks and those outcomes, you're looking at an increased gross and net retention rate, and then actually, again, tracking those specific verified outcomes, which are, again, that conversation of what's the goal, when should we revisit it, did we accomplish it, if yes, verified outcome. And I think similar to what I mentioned earlier, while these are metrics that an entire post-sales organization would track and be held accountable to, this you can think of also as a similar maturity for how you would compensate your team members.
That's really interesting, and I think one of the topics that we often hear when we talk with clients is what should we be measuring based on where we are in our CSM organization. And I think this is a great framework and a great way for organizations to think through what are the metrics we should be focused on and how do we evolve those over time. Chris, from your perspective, as you guys went down this journey, how did you guys' journey mirror, this best practice around metrics?
Yeah, really simply, and I might ask Jackie to talk a little bit about the health scoring that we do, because I think that's indicative of where we've arrived at. Really simply, we at first would always look at adoption and really just product adoption, using the product. And we go and talk to them about using the product and what features they've adopted, and that was never a clear indicator of what the outcome was going to be in terms of retention or growth. It was really had no relation. They could be the best or the most active users of the product, and then tell us at the end of the day that not sure how to justify this. So one of the ways that we did the insurance like a year and a half ago, when we rallied the company around this, is we organized a lot of different teams. We spent time out with clients in the field, and we said, what are some of the most basic things that when you use our product that you could actually measure in terms of outcomes? Like, what are some of the simplest things that if we went into an organization who hasn't been using something like this, we could say, you could start on day 0, and on day 30 or day 60, you could actually look and see if you've moved the needle in some respect. So just to give people on the line like 1 or 2 tangible things, we serve teams in the Security Operations Center of the SOC. And an awful lot of the job in those functions is just mowing through tickets and incident cases. And what we work with clients on is establishing some time reduction metrics around how much time were their end users spending on each individual ticket before and after they had our data in their environment. How many cases were they able to escalate that were relevant to the business compared to before, when they were having to chew through this huge pile of tickets and without any context make a determination or a judgment on what's meaningful to the business or not. So in short, we were able to sort of put down a couple of metrics that say, figure out how much time savings we're giving to this function, and figure out what the delta is between what you would have escalated previously to what you are now. And so some bare bones metrics, if you don't have them built into your product, that you can take out to your clients and say, here's where you can start if you don't measure anything today. And enabling to do that was big for us.
I think that's a great topic for those because some of us have products that are very straightforward, have some of it built in, but for others, I think that's a great example of how you can start the dialogue with your customers and start to change that dialogue. And with that, I'm going to transition into our last topic before we open up for some Q&A, which is really around how you all have leveraged technology to augment what you're doing and leverage technology to really embed the execution of this in your organization. And so with that, Jackie, I wanted to turn over to you and just to ask, share a little bit around how you guys have leveraged Gainsight and leveraged technology to help you prove that value during onboarding. And then we'll talk a little bit about health scoring before we open up for some Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so what everyone sees here, this is a picture of a kind of, I like to call it the State of the Union status dashboard for all of our clients going through onboarding that the client onboarding team is managing. This is, we review this. This is always available on demand in Gainsight for everyone on our team to access, but we make it a point to review it every week during our kind of like client all hands call. We go through risk, share some good stories, but just make sure we're rallied around how the team is progressing and how we're doing at achieving our goals. I like this because it really calls to attention how we're tracking success, right, for our clients during onboarding. You can see here that we have, we're calling out, we're essentially what we're doing here is I'm tracking time to value. The wins column is what I was describing earlier. And a win is essentially where a onboarding manager or someone engaging with the client logs in Gainsight. We have a custom activity type. They take note and document when the customer has essentially confirmed value. They've validated that they've achieved an outcome in recorded future tying to objectives they care about. And so what we do is we count up, we take all of those wins, as we call it, and then we feed them into our dashboard. And this determines, looking at this is something that I can say and get a sense of how a customer is tracking on their time to value, because I see what onboarding stage that they're in. You can see the most recent onboarding milestones, and are they making progress? Are they on track to see ROI in 30 business days? And one thing I will say about the wins, as we call them, but it's really customer value achievement, is that we push those, we automate that as well into a Slack channel that the entire company can see. So those wins are able to be shared across the organization.
That's really interesting. And I think the other thing that is really awesome about what you've done is made those wins client defined and agreed with those, so that you're really getting their buy-in through the onboarding that we are delivering value as the basis for the relationship.
And
exactly.
I'll add that just real quick, that the visibility of these things and what Jackie and team have done to issue these out to the larger organization. We use Slack. You could use a newsletter. You could use a company email. Occasionally, whatever you can do, it reinforces that. It really has reinforced for us from our side the company commitment behind really orienting everything around value. So the fact that we continue on a daily basis to flow examples of value-based outcomes has not just justified the work that we're doing and things like that. It demonstrates valuable use cases to others in the organization. It feeds sort of ideas around the company, and it's really just been illustrative of the company commitment and backing of this, right? So I just highly encourage that to anybody that's trying to push this as an initiative internally.
That's a great point. It's actually interesting because right before this, I was in a conversation about this very topic, and I think it's a great example at a very tactical and tangible level of how to reinforce the connection points from your customers through the whole organization, and to raise even new and different frontiers of value that we could add for customers that others might not even be aware of. And with that, I wanted to just talk a little bit before we conclude with some Q&A around health scoring and how you guys have tied health score in. And so maybe Lauren, I'll let you just share from a Gainsight perspective, and then Jackie, you can share how you guys measure customer health from an outcome perspective and how that kind of supports you and your engagement with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at a screenshot of the health score within the Gainsight platform. And so you can see the main buckets we have are the outcomes, health, and customer experience. And I think for sake of time, the key things here are making it as data-driven as possible and informing CSMs. So for example, with adoption, if adoption of the platform drops, alerting the CSM of that change. So they're not having to manually go in and look, but then also giving CSMs the ability to actually edit the health score or essentially override what the data points are telling us. So a customer may be completely green across the board, but a CSM has a strategic conversation with an executive there and understands that outcomes are not being met, and there's a serious risk, the CSM should be able to also inform the health score. So it's a bit of that closed loop process of, one, informing CSMs of data point changes, but allowing CSMs to also inform the health score from their one-off strategic conversations.
And then, Jackie, anything specific to Recorded Future you would chime in terms of how you guys have measured health and it's supported you in kind of driving that value-based engagement?
Sure. Again, for interest of time, I just want to call out, well, I will say that we adopted Gainsight's DEAR framework, the best practice health score model framework, to identify those indicators of or to track outcomes for the customer, to think of the health score based on outcomes. So our model does follow this. One thing I will say that we've discovered for our business that's very important for tracking value is to add a verbal validation of value for some of these data points. One specifically is the measure for adoption. Chris alluded to this earlier. We have some clients where they could be using one of our products, they could be the heaviest user, and maybe something's off, they're actually not seeing value, or they could use it really lightly, which could send a flag that they're not getting value out of adoption, but they are getting value out of it. So what we've done is we've complemented the quantitative data with that qualitative check for a couple of our health measures. And then lastly, we factor in those wins that I was talking about into our ROI health measure. So that's essentially looking to make sure that we're getting at least one win recorded in our activity, in our timeline per quarter, so that we know that, okay, that we validated the customer is seeing value from us. So those are kind of just two things I wanted to call out specific to value for our health score model.
Excellent. I think that's a great example of how, at a Gainsight level and also within Recorded Future, you guys have deployed this to really automate that process of value capture and make sure it's embedded in the way that you engage with the clients. And so with that, I think we're getting near the end of our time, but wanted to just open up, Christina, for Q&A from the group and any specific questions that the group has that we'd like to capture.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you, everyone. And if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the question panel. We do have a few coming in already. The first is, could you tell me more about how you coordinate with sales during a pre-signature period? We have a hard time getting our sales team to open up before the deal is actually closed.
Okay, Jackie, you want to take that?
Sure. So, I mean, at a high level, I think what benefits us is that our sales team tracks and logs a lot of information in Salesforce. So we can track it. We can see the customer meeting notes or important anecdotes from the pre-sales engagement in Salesforce as the deal is progressing. And then once the deal closes or it's near closure, we schedule what we call an internal handoff meeting, where it's knowledge sharing between those two teams. And I think I know we've had to have done a lot of training and change management in the beginning when we launched this with the pre-sales team and getting their management on board for the value of this. And so because those teams they understand the importance of this knowledge share, that made it really, really easy to get their full collaboration on helping us during that time.
Can I add? I'll add very, very quickly two other quick things. One, if you can if you feel comfortable offering up some of the customer success managers or resources on the post-sale side as a selling point on the pre-sale side, we get invited in pretty regularly to talk about our program and to make introductions to the kinds of people they would work with on the post-sale side. And that's proven to be a nice hook to get some exposure into what's coming, especially with bigger deals. And then I think, additionally, any sort of incentive structure for new business sales reps, where if there's growth opportunity or there's expansion in accounts where they can see some monetary benefit from having a successful post-sales engagement, is another tool that you can have around if your organization is open to that.
One other one that I'll add.
And then one
other one I'll add, just selfishly, that you guys did do was really creating a consistent platform in terms of skills training around how you actually communicate and discover value on the front end, with how you actually then take back and kind of rediscover, revalidate, and then confirm value on the back end. So one of the things that I think you guys did that is a little bit unique is train both your sales and pre-sales, as well as your customer success org, in a similar framework and skills for how you think about customer value. So I think that's another piece that I'll just add that I think you guys did, which enabled you to at least get a common language and common way that you do that.
Great. And then one question, and then we'll wrap up. How do you create a holistic customer health score that is applicable across all cohorts when your different clients have different desired business outcomes?
I'm happy to.
Lauren, do you want to?
Oh, sure. Lauren can take it.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it first, and then Jackie, please chime in. It's a really good question. So I do think that having a kind of simplified health score across your entire customer base is important, and it allows you to have a lot of benchmarking conversations. With the point specifically around different outcomes, those nuances should certainly be tracked. And so we've established, we've basically broken down the different types of outcomes that our customers may want to achieve, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, and then what specific metric or aspect of their business it's impacting. So we are able to report on the very specific details of the outcomes that are driving, but the overall health framework remains the same across the customer base. But Jackie, curious what you guys have done as well.
That's exactly what we've set up. We've set up our model to, we've, kind of like getting really tactically, the rules that are backing up that model are looking for at the high level ROI or outcome achievement, but then the way that we've set it up, capturing that outcome achievement in the timeline, activity timeline, has enabled us to make it really specific to the client and the metrics and outcomes they care about, but it does support a way to do this across the board for all of our customers to measure the health.
Wonderful. And that brings us to 2 p.m. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. I will be sending a recording out, so keep a lookout for an email. And thank you to all of our presenters today. This is fabulous.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us, and thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.